Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are embarking on what I can only describe as a truly dramatic historical journey, the French Revolution. We're actually calling this the Crucible of Liberty, and you'll see why in a minute. We're going to trace the breathtaking arc of a nation that shifted from this deeply idealistic rebellion against absolute power all the way into a tyrannical, state-sponsored bloodbath. It's a story packed with soaring rhetoric, profound paranoia, and ultimately, utter tragedy.
Just imagine the scene for a second. It's June 23rd, 1789. The king has literally ordered the commoners to disperse, but a 39-year-old nobleman, representing the Third Estate, the Count of Mirabeau, while he stands his ground. And he thunders, "Tell those who send you that we are here by the will of the people and will leave only by the force of bayonets." Wow. It is this thrilling, theatrical moment of absolute rebellion, and it instantly sets the stage for everything that followed.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's the roadmap of the tragic arc we're about to follow. First, the spark of revolution. Second, the fall of kings. Third, the power of the word. Fourth, the reign of terror. And finally, number 5, the revolution consumes itself.
So, part 1, the spark of revolution.
When brilliant 18th century Enlightenment ideology violently collided with a catastrophic fiscal crisis, an ancient absolute monarchy was completely dismantled at just a staggering speed. I mean, think about this timeline. In May of 1789, they convene the Estates General just to talk about taxes. By June, the commoners take the famous tennis court oath, swearing to write a constitution. In July, the tension completely explodes into mob violence with the storming of the Bastille. The crowd, absolutely desperate for gunpowder, fights a bloody battle with the fortress garrison, and it ended brutally. The governor of the Bastille, the Marquis de Launay, was murdered, and his severed head was paraded through Paris on a pike. And then by August, the entire feudal system, literally centuries of aristocratic privilege, was legally erased.
Now you might be wondering, how on earth did it happen so fast? Well, King Louis XVI was dealing with systemic vulnerabilities that essentially left him with no choice but to, inadvertently, spark the revolution himself. The royal treasury was totally empty, largely from funding foreign conflicts like the American Revolution. So the nation was practically bankrupt, public payments were suspended, and they had this incredibly rigid tax system that completely protected the wealthy nobility and clergy while burdening literally everyone else. Add in severe bread shortages across Paris, and you've got a powder keg just waiting for a match. The king had to summon the Estates General to fix the finances, and well, that opened the floodgates.
Moving on to part 2, the fall of kings.
In this second phase, the initial attempts at a constitutional monarchy began to fracture. Deep paranoia set in, and the crown completely collapsed by 1792. So, I want to pose a question directly to you. Why did the French actually execute their king? Well, beyond the mounting anger and early failures in their foreign wars, a fatal piece of evidence emerged. They discovered a secret iron safe hidden right inside the Tuileries Palace, and it was filled with the king's private correspondence with foreign enemies. This essentially proved he was secretly working against the revolution. It was a real game changer. This discovery made a trial for high treason totally unavoidable.
So, the crucial point here is how the newly declared republic handled this unprecedented trial. On one side, you had the Girondins. They were the moderates. They favored a decentralized government and basically sought to delay executing the king, mostly because they feared it would turn all of Europe against them. Now, on the flip side, you had the Jacobins, also known as the Mountain. These were the radicals. They demanded a centralized emergency government, absolute equality, and the king's immediate execution. And ultimately, the radical Jacobins won the debate.
The core Jacobin argument was perfectly captured by Louis Antoine Saint-Just. And get this, he was only 25 years old at the time. With this uncompromising, icy logic, he essentially argued that kingship itself was a crime. He said, "No man can reign innocently. Louis is an alien among us and not a citizen. He must die." That powerful, chilling speech helped seal the king's fate without a traditional legal defense, sending him straight to the guillotine in January of 1793.
Which brings us to part 3, the power of the word.
You know, the French Revolution was fueled by this unprecedented burst of explosive oratory. Men's thoughts had been imprisoned for centuries, and suddenly, soaring rhetoric was directly shaping matters of life and death. Just listen to this thunderous rallying cry from George Danton, one of the revolution's most powerful voices. He totally weaponized his speech to unite the radicals and crush any internal moderation. He shouts, "If then it was the profound sense of duty which dictated the condemnation of the king, rally around me against the cowards who would have spared him. Close your ranks." It's just brilliant, aggressive oratory, designed specifically to paint anyone who disagreed with the king's execution as a traitor to the nation.
Danton's words perfectly illustrate this terrifying shift we see, moving from the constitutional idealism of 1789 to a mindset of ruthless survival at any cost. He argued, "What are your laws and theories to us, when the only law is to triumph, and the sole theory for the nation is the theory of existence?" He's openly declaring right there that the emergency of the Republic overrides any written law. And honestly, this rhetoric laid the exact psychological groundwork for extreme state violence.
And that leads right into our darkest chapter, Part 4, The Reign of Terror. Facing foreign invasion and massive domestic rebellions, the revolution birthed an emergency executive dictatorship in 1793 called the Committee of Public Safety. And right at the center of this terror was the guillotine. Originally introduced as a scientifically humane method of execution, it quickly became an everyday, inescapable reality. People mockingly nicknamed it the National Razor, the Widow, and the Sword of Equality. And to really show you how deeply this trauma permeated society, pro-Republican women even started this macabre fashion trend of wearing miniature guillotine earrings. No way, right? But it's entirely true. 1,376. That is the staggering number of individuals sentenced to death in Paris in just 6 weeks during the summer of 1794. So how did it get so high so fast? Well, the government passed the Law of 22 Prairial, which entirely stripped away the need for witnesses or evidence in trials. It was literally a coin toss for your life. You were either acquitted or you were sent to the guillotine, no middle ground.
The mastermind behind this terrifying system was Maximilien Robespierre. And what's incredibly tragic here is that early in his career, he was a humanitarian. He fiercely opposed the death penalty. But over time, he shifted to ideologically justify the bloodbath. He stated, "The foundations of a popular government in a revolution are virtue and terror. Terror without virtue is disastrous, and virtue without terror is powerless." He truly, genuinely believed he had to crush the enemies of liberty in order to save it.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, The Revolution Consumes Itself. It's a profound, almost unbelievable tragic irony that the architects of the terror were inevitably devoured by the very lethal machinery they created. We start with the moderate Girondins, who, as we discussed, were purged by the radical Jacobins. As their leader, Jacques-Pierre Brissot, and 21 of his allies waited at the foot of the scaffold in October 1793, they defiantly sang this patriotic refrain together. "Rather death than slavery" is the motto of the French. Then there's the deeply poignant lament of Madame Roland. She was actually a very influential supporter of the early revolution. But as the blade hovered over her, she clearly recognized the horrific perversion of their initial ideals. She allegedly cried out at a Statue of Liberty, O Liberty, what crimes are committed in thy name?" Amidst all this horror, there were actually moments of dark, almost surreal humor. Take the Duke of Biron. He was convicted merely of a lack of civic virtue. But he was incredibly calm when the executioner arrived to tell him it was time. He famously asked, "My friend, will you let me finish my last dozen oysters?" I mean, it perfectly highlights just how bizarrely routine these daily executions had become.
And then the revolution turned on its own greatest champions. Georges Danton, the man whose booming voice we heard rallying the Republic earlier, found himself condemned by Robespierre. True to his theatrical nature to the very end, his arrogant final command to the executioner in April 1794 was, "Thou wilt show my head to the people. It is worth the trouble."
Finally, the pendulum swung back. Terrified deputies in the convention realized that, hey, if they didn't act soon, Robespierre would eventually send them all to the guillotine. And this sparked what's known as the Thermidorian reaction. Robespierre was arrested, his jaw was violently shattered by a gunshot, and on July 28, 1794, the absolute architect of the terror was sent to the very scaffold he had commanded. With his death, the reign of terror finally ended.
The immediate aftermath saw the nation violently swing back from that radical extremism. The emergency tribunals were quickly dismantled, literally thousands of political prisoners were released from the dungeons, and churches that had been forcibly closed during the de-Christianization campaigns were reopened. By 1795, a new, much more moderate government called the Directory took power. And this stabilization, well, it ultimately paved the way for a young, ambitious general named Napoleon Bonaparte to eventually take total control of France. So look at the immense moral complexity of what we just explored. I want to leave you with this thought. Was the ocean of blood spilled during the Reign of Terror the necessary price of forging the Republic against all odds? Or was it the ultimate betrayal of liberty itself? It's a massive question, and it's one historians are still actively debating today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. It's been an incredible journey. See you next time.